just gonna ask, so we have.
Yeah.
Do we need to do? No. That. All right. We left executive session at 1:28 this afternoon. Leah, do we have a quorum again?
Yes, I believe we do.
Thank you. As a result of our executive session, there is some actions that need to be taken. Is anybody willing to make a motion? Senator McCauley?
Thank you. I would make the motion that we engage the Bennett Law Firm to defend each of these claims that have been made against the foundation in both the Franklin County Common Pleas Court and the Ohio Supreme Court. And if the Bennett Law Firm decides that they are conflicted out for some reason from engaging in this matter, that we allow our executive committee, which is about to be formed, to choose a law firm to engage in this matter instead of the Bennett Law Firm.
Second that motion. That fix.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Jeff. Leah, do we have a roll call vote for that, please?
Yes. Rob McCauley,
Yes.
Tom Gregor,
Yes.
Larry Kidd,
Yes.
Jane Portman,
Yes.
Michael Royson,
Yes.
Christopher Smitherman,
Yes.
Josh Cox,
Yes.
Denise Streethouse. Did we lose Denise?
She's on there. Denise, are you there? Yes, sorry, I got kicked off. I'm back on.
Armand Bodish. Is Armand not there?
You said yes.
Armin,
but
yeah.
Can't hear him.
Mike Beasley,
That was a yes, by the way, for Armin.
sorry. Eileen Shapiro,
Yes.
Dwayne Picarelli,
Yes.
Dodge,
Yes.
Bambi Bond,
Yes.
Jeffrey Simmons,
Yes.
Jeanette Worsbicky,
Yes.
Don Mason,
Yes.
Catherine Whittington,
Yes.
Greta Mayer,
Yes.
Greta Mayer,
Yes.
Julie Amon,
Yes.
Keith H,
Yes.
Glenn Miller,
Yes.
Marcia Hondru,
Yes.
Jeffrey Fix,
Yes.
William Hudson.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carried. Okay, we're going to jump back to the agenda at this point. Everybody did receive minutes in their packet. Did everyone have a chance to review those?
I have a correction.
Okay.
My name is not Bambi Couch Page, it's Vaughn. And it's that way several times in the minutes, and for some reason you have me listed as an assistant prosecutor in Huron County, where I'm actually the executive director of the Community Action Agency in Fayette County.
I am so sorry.
I was looking that up on LinkedIn to try to reconcile it, and I don't know where we got that.
I don't either. I thought there was two Bambis. I was very confused.
So
So
in Region 9, there's only me.
I honestly, I thought they swapped out a different Bambi. I really did. So I'm sorry.
Probably the only, about the only one in the county.
I thought it seemed like a rather strange coincidence, but
I'll make a motion to approve as corrected.
I have one correction as well. Region 13, I was not appointed by the mayors.
You can make that change.
Thank you.
I'll accept that change too.
Thank you.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you.
was that Larry?
Yes.
No, I think it's Jeff.
Jeff.
Bill
Yes.
Hudson.
Jeff
Or
is.
Jeff.
Jeff.
Here I am.
Right. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I need to abstain from March, or the May 16th minutes since I wasn't present.
Need to abstain also because I was not present either.
Thank you. Great, motion carries.
Do we have a welcome, new board member? Would you like to maybe?
Do you want to introduce yourself? We kind of just threw you into the fire today.
I'm good. Keith Hall from Region 6, Stark County. Appointed by our group within our committee. Spent 13 years as working in behavioral health with Commonwealth West and then Commonwealth Services, last 10 as the executive director. 25 and a half years in recovery from alcoholism and opiate use disorder. And currently Canton Township trustee and the executive director of Faith Range Already.
Well, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Glad to have you.
Thanks.
I welcome someone from my hometown.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in?
Next set of minutes.
We did all
all
three.
three at once.
Mhm. Okay, we are going to skip down. If you turn to the second page, we're going to go to establishing the standing committees. So the first one that I'd like to discuss is the executive committee. Currently, that is comprised of Dr. Roizen, myself, and Larry Kidd. It would be my recommendation that we have Don Mason join as the vice chair, since he is the chair of the investment committee.
Working group.
Working group, yes, working group that's going to become a committee here in a moment. So, that is my recommendation at this point to make Don Mason the vice chair.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you.
I'll second that motion.
Okay,
Tony, you got one more thing to do?
and we have a first, we have a second. Any opposed?
Discussion. You,
Yes.
you want 4 instead of an odd number?
We're moving towards that. We needed to create the vice chair. There's only 3 members right now that are officers. That's myself as the chair, Larry is the secretary, and Dr. Roizen is the secretary. We did not have a vice chair, and according to our code of regs, we will be needing the vice chair position, so we needed to put that in. And then we'll be continuing on with the executive committee formation.
Which that's recommended at 5. 5.
Any further discussion? Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make another motion.
Okay,
I would like to formalize the executive committee with the 4 people you had just mentioned. You as chairman, Dr. Rosen as treasurer, Don Mason as vice chair, and me as secretary, with the idea and hope that we would get perhaps a metro representative to fill that 5th seat.
So the way, if I might.
do you want to, you want me to do it?
Sure.
Go- No, go ahead.
The draft code of regulations, which is on the agenda for today, sets forth the process for electing officers and also members of committees. We had discussed some, how it's currently written is a representative on the executive committee from each of the director classes. It's common practice to have officers serve on the executive committee and then have an at-large member as well. So if the group is amenable, we might edit the code of regulations to mirror that. So it would be, instead of the 4 director classes, it would be the 3, now 4 officers plus an at-large member. If we look at the composition right now of the officers, there is no legislative representation, although that is sort of proving to be the toughest challenge to meet in terms of attendance. The second is metropolitan region representation. And so I think that's why, Larry, you were suggesting that a volunteer from the metropolitan regions join the executive committee.
So Holly, I think one of the exhibits to the MOU somewhere defined the metro and non-metro. So
Exactly.
I don't know what that is, but so who qualifies as a metro? What regions or,
It's 1 through 8.
yeah, is there a choice of?
Yeah.
Regions 1 through 8.
Look up your hand if you're interested.
If you're in regions 1 through 8, raise your hand.
We've got some
Nobody's
members
going
on the
to-
phone as well.
We can do some.
I'm the only one here.
No, we have
Tag, you're in.
Denise, you're one.
Denise, Tria,
Armand, you're one.
what?
I believe.
Oh, Josh.
Colleague here from Region 6.
Look at that.
At a brief sidebar, and I would note, as he said earlier, he's a person with lived experience.
So what happens when you come to your first?
Yes, yeah.
That's what happened when I came to my first.
So do you want to make that part of your motion?
We'll make a deal here.
Does he accept that?
Do you accept?
Yes.
Are there any other individuals that are interested?
Anybody else who would be interested in serving as the at-large representative for the metropolitan areas?
Okay, I'd like to revise my motion to include our colleague from Region 6, you say?
Mr. Leach.
Yes.
Do we have a second?
Second, Jeff Dix.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Thank you all for the time you're about to invest in that.
Thank you. Do you want to go ahead and do the committees, or do you want to?
Now, Madam Chair, I'd like to establish the other remaining committees that are on Section 8 to include audit and finance, personnel, investment, great oversight, and establishing an ad hoc search committee for your actions. So I make a motion to establish these committees.
Do we have a second?
Second, Jeff Dix. For anybody who doesn't know, that's my role in this organization. I'm just the second guy.
Okay, any discussion? Yes, so we do have volunteers that are currently serving on some of the working groups. So establishing these committees. We do have some people that are already, willing to serve, but we will open it up to, finding out if there's anybody else who would like to join the committees once
We can
they're.
circulate that. Would that be helpful?
Yes.
Just a lot of you have already raised your hand, but yeah,
Yeah.
we could circulate that.
That would be great. Thank you.
There's always room for more.
There's always plenty of room and plenty of work.
Well, I would volunteer for the Bridge Oversight Committee.
Okay.
So much. I heard a second. So was that you? Julie. Julie. Okay.
Julie for grant oversight?
Yes.
Yeah.
I already have a
Tammy.
I think you're on
Yeah.
there, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Listed as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and.
Sorry.
It's okay. All right. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. We've established our committees. Holly, do you want to go back up to the first page and see how far we can get through?
Yeah, sure. Marty, do you want to run through the operational checklist? Because that includes our update on the tax exemption.
So we're going to go back to the first page and we're going to turn it over to Benish for an update.
And the checklist pretty much speaks for itself. Jessica, are you on up there somewhere? Did she have to sign off? She's one of my busiest partners.
Julia's on the line.
Huh?
Julia's on the line.
Well, Julia, chime in whenever you think you should. Most of the checklist, you've seen all of this before. What we did do is, and we set it up so that the tasks are on the left-hand side and the action needed or the actions that have been taken are on the right-hand side. And some of these actions are happening today at this meeting and others are a bit in the future. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because you certainly can email me with any questions you have about it. But if you go to the operational matters, item E, which is at the bottom of the page, I'm not sure.
It's like page 3, maybe.
Of that section, yeah. That's just the heading, and then you turn to the next page. These are all of the things that need to be done before we can actually file an application for exemption. So this, if you're looking for the handout, it's the one that looks like this. It's it's landscape printed. And you'll see at the top of the list in this section, we need an approved code of regulations that's on the agenda for today. We need a conflict of interest policy. We need, obviously, identification of the board members, a very detailed narrative of what the activities of the foundation are going to be and how we're going to engage in those activities. We need to tell the IRS what our grant-making process is going to be because you are a grant-making entity. So we have to give the IRS the information they want to see. There are rules about this. They show up in the private foundation as opposed to the public charity section of the IRS rules, but they apply to us. I mean, they are the standards the IRS will look at. This is why the grants making committee is going to be engaged in setting up a process and improving at least preliminary application. We need an estimated budget. We did a quick run through because we had to give the potential insurance providers that information. But the IRS wants a budget of both expected revenue and expenses for the current year in which we file, which we plan will be this year, and 2 prospective years. So we need a 3-year budget, and that needs to come through the Budget Finance Committee, and then it will be part of what the board approves. The IRS does not come back and say, oh, well, you didn't spend $12 on pencils or whatever. But it looks at the budget, it looks at the revenue stream to see that you meet the categories for being a public charity as opposed to a private foundation. And that's a lot of tax weeds I'm not going to go into here and now. And on the expense side, it has you lump your revenue or your expenses into certain categories and they pull out the ones that they apparently think they find the most, objections to in terms of this is where people who are scamming do it. So we have to do things like salary and benefits. We have to do fundraising expenses. We have to tell them any occupancy expenses we anticipate. So those are the kinds of estimates we're looking at. But you're obviously your actual budget, your actual expenses and actual budgets are going to differ some from what you tell the IRS well in advance of when you're, actually doing anything. But we have to do it. If we don't do that, the IRS will just send the application back. So there's a lot of work to be done before we can actually file the 1023, and the committees will be integral to that work. hopefully, we'll get a search committee or a search firm engaged shortly, so that we can start the process of hiring, an assistant, an executive director who can then hire some staff, so I can retire. And, you think I'm kidding? And of course, we're going to be talking about, how we deal with the bank account and the checking account, and we're going to need, for a while anyway, in my opinion, financial officer, that will, be on a contract basis with an outside firm or something.
Also on.
It's on the agenda, because we're gonna have money. So when you go through this checklist, a lot of this stuff is stuff that sort of needs to be done yesterday. And so your committees are gonna have work to do. That's all I'm gonna say about this. If anybody, do you want to add anything, Holly or Julia?
No.
Questions? You look at it in detail and have questions, just email us to us. Happy to answer them.
I think you just took a major step towards a lot of these processes by creating standing committees, of which we'll be undertaking a lot of these procedures, so.
Okay, update on settlement, administrator deposits. Holly?
Yes, so we have been working through the process since the last board meeting to get the bank accounts set up. We are working with Huntington on the operational bank accounts. Don's going to give an update soon here relating to the investment side. On the depository services, we do have an update on the anticipated settlement payments. The first is we have been saying sort of all along that we expect about 15 million. That has now increased. So we're expecting 2 payments from the distributor settlement before the end of the year to come to the foundation, just as there'll be 2 settlements directly to the local governments before the end of the year. Those are expected. We don't know exact numbers yet, but perhaps in the range of about $14 million each. So that's 30 million from the distributor side. The next one is the Johnson & Johnson Janssen. We expect that first payment will be in the range of 5.5 million, and the second in the range of 10 million. So it looks as though the foundation may have deposits in excess of $40 million before the end of this year. So that's significantly different from what we had anticipated and wanted to make sure you know that. In terms of the bank account, can I just make a quick plug for Dr. Roizen to complete the paperwork as our treasurer, please? Thank you. And then we will soon be on our way to opening a bank account. We have all of that process in place. We've had numerous meetings with the financial services team at Huntington. And as I expect that will be done in the next day or so. That will then allow us to contact the settlement administrator to begin the process of receiving the funds.
Leah, just to let you know, I have completed the paperwork that's been sent. There is one thing that is missing. I'm supposed to get a second signature card and I have not gotten it yet to sign off on it.
Okay, we'll follow up on that. Okay. We will make sure that we're communicating both with the board members as well as the public, our list of stakeholders about those receipt of those funds, because we know that it's of the utmost interest to members of the public about this process. The second point is about expenditure of those funds. So you just established the grant making committee. That committee will go through a process of adopting the grant making policy. So there are numerous steps that you guys will be undertaking before any expenditure of funds will begin. And that will all be, again, communicated back to your regions. Of course, they're a very important part of this process, as well as the general public. So just wanted to, make sure that everyone knew that there's, where we stand in the process. Anything to add?
Yeah, Madam Chair and Holly, I would imagine it's worth noting that, given the committees and timeframe that probably none of the monies will be let out before 2023. But that's just,
Yeah, I
looking
think
at the
that's,
timelines.
I think that's a fair estimate. I think it would be very difficult to get a process in place and get the recommendations in from the regions and all of that within the current calendar year. So just trying to manage expectations here. Nobody's sitting on the money deliberately, but there are criteria for it being spent, and there are tax regulations that govern how we go about the process and what the grantees have to demonstrate. And so part of the grants committee job will be to find a way to make it clear what the application needs to look like and what the grantees have to tell us in order to meet the terms both of the MOU and the tax regulations. So, and then, there's that process that happens at the regional level to vet things and recommend them upstream. So it's not quick.
Okay, so that's, on the deposits. Anyone have any?
Is there any questions on that? The bank accounts or the dollars? Code of regulations, Holly.
Yes, sure. So everyone should have received last week the draft code of regulations with all of the changes. I want to say thank you to everyone that provided feedback and input. We took that very seriously, and there are a lot of changes reflected in this document. I won't go through it all line by line. You've seen it. You're welcome to ask questions, engage in discussion. But I'll just point out there's kind of some common themes. Jessica, also feel free to chime in here as well. So I'd say the first one is around transparency. As we've mentioned, we plan to adopt a transparency policy that will sort of pull out more of this in detail. But we heard from you that you would like to, per the MOU, operate transparently, right? So we are a private nonprofit corporation under 1702. And so that would be a voluntary process that you do that. In the original draft of the Code of Regulations, we had the board and then expert panel subject to transparency. We're recommending, based on your feedback, that you add in the committee process as well. So that would also be available for the public to attend. A couple of items as well. We have, that the board and the committee can enter into an executive session where they wish to discuss certain sensitive topics. We did not carry through that provision to the expert panel because they will be discussing, they have a very specific role as part of their process, and we felt like it was appropriate for them to operate entirely in the public. So I think if there's any discussion around the transparency policy, I think that's, sort of top of mind for people. If you'd like to share any thoughts and feedback around what we've currently proposed in the document or any alternatives, feel free. Jessica, do you have anything to add?
Not on that point.
Are there any comments, changes that the board would like to see in the Code of Regulations?
To the transparency policies.
Yeah, I'll kind of go through, maybe get me to carry on with sort of we have 4 themes, or 3 themes to share.
Sure. We'll move through the theme.
Okay. The second one is on the delegation of fiduciary duties. The MOU had a provision that specifically said that designees could attend meetings. We are recommending that provision is not included in the Code of Regulations because, as you've heard us say a number of times, you cannot delegate your fiduciary duties. So we want to make sure it's already, there are very strict requirements of how quorum can be reached, how action can be taken. we think it's really important that you, as board members, are not just here, but you would be the only ones that are able to take action. So it's really important that we have you participating. Marty, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think you summarized it, and, you know, I think everybody, except possibly our new member, heard this, that under the common law of Ohio and pretty much all the other states, directors of a nonprofit organization cannot delegate their fiduciary duty. Unlike in state government, you have commissions and boards and whatnot, and you'll often see language where it is the director of a particular department or their designee. That's a function of statute, and there is in fact a statutory, there is a requirement for the level of fiduciary duty those persons have to have. So a director can't just choose anybody to be their designee. So it's a common thread. In the case of a private nonprofit entity, we do not have that designee provision. And we just can't make it happen. So you all are important, and you are the voting members. So we're leaving designees out of the code, at least that's our recommendation, notwithstanding the MOU.
And then sort of in alignment with that, we received a number of inquiries relating to the role of the board in the selection of projects to be funded. So it's really important that for a nonprofit board, you have a fiduciary duty to decide how the money of the foundation shall be spent, that it's spent prudently, that you're keeping accurate records, right? There are certain requirements. If we were to include in the code, as some have suggested, that the board is simply signing off without conducting your own review of projects to be funded, we think that potentially jeopardizes your fiduciary duty to the organization. So we think it's important, of course, we know how important it is to you all that you receive recommendations from the regions, but ultimately the authority to approve grant making should rest with the board. Do you have anything to add, Marty, or?
So a question about that, just so we're clear, the idea is that the regions are accepting applications, grant applications, and they're reviewing those grant applications and sending those that they think are worthy to us as a board. And we as a board would then have the ability to say yes or no to any or all of those applications. Not that we as a board would create or seek other applications or move money around from region to region, but that we would simply say yes or no to those specific applications from each region individually.
There are two sort of pockets, if you
Yeah.
will. The regions, a certain portion of the money at the foundation level, external to the local share, put the local share aside, but that doesn't go through us. We have nothing to do with the local share. But a portion of the money that comes to the foundation is essentially allocated to each region. So the regions would be suggesting and recommending opportunities for the expenditure of that portion of their money. But the board has the fiduciary responsibility to look at the project, see if it, first of all, your first line is always, does it make any sense?
Right, so but we're just saying
But
yes or
there's also, you've got to vet those to make sure they fall within the purposes, all of that. But there is then money that is not specifically allocated to the regions, which this board has the authority to decide. How do you want to accept applications? Do you want to kind of fill in the blanks from what the regions have proposed? Is there a statewide need you want to address? I mean, you have latitude with respect to that money. And so I envision there'll be applications that come directly here. You may want, because somebody does that or tries to circumvent the region from a political small p perspective, I would go back to the region and say, this has come up from your region. Is there some reason, that it just, where there's 5 projects and this was number 6, it just didn't make your cut? What do you think about it? I mean, those kind of communications need to go. Yeah, I think for the, depending on where the applications are.
Right, but you understand the premise that we're, as a regional representative, are looking for is that the region has the control over the applications that are submitted to the board, and the board then is just saying yes or no to those applications and sending it back to the region, right?
Well, Marty, I don't think we can answer that question yet because we have to develop a policy first. The grant making committee will determine what our policy, we don't even know yet.
Well, I
I
think,
mean, we have some ideas for sure, and
I think that's true, but I also think from a legal perspective, it's not a pass-through. There'll have to be some level of review.
Right.
At this
And I'm not suggesting there wouldn't be. I'm saying
Okay,
it's,
that's
it's
perfect.
not like they're going to line item edit or, suggest other or send money in other ways, for other applications. I mean, the region has the controls.
Jeff, are you concerned about applicants, say from your region that were not going through the regional process, that they might then still have the opportunity to access the regional pot of funds through their own application to the board?
That's part of it, yes. So the idea, as I understood it, in the way my region has read it, is that, we're the ones closest to those who have the needs and want to address those needs. And so we're asking them to come to us with what those needs are and how we can help them. And so we want to maintain that link, right? Not that they're coming to the board directly or that, the board is in any way circumventing the regional.
Oh, yeah, I see, yeah.
Yeah.
And I
There's
think,
totally a reason for the regional board.
right,
And if we write our code of regs, that it just kind of leaves that whole step out then. Okay, why do we have a regional board? Because it very clearly states that applications shall come from the regions.
Can I, in here?
Yeah,
get
but I'd
some-
like to,
By both these questions. So section 11, and Holly, you may have been gonna get to that in a minute, but you're touching on section 11, which is the disbursement of funds. And in the MOU, exhibit B goes through and it allocates 100% of the funds to the various regions. And so my question is, Marty, I think kind of what they're getting at is there going to be a percentage, and I can get them here in just a second.
So it's 100%.
100%, right. At the bottom, it's 100%. So it goes region 1 through 19. There is no statewide region.
No, so I think the way that, if I'm not mistaken, that language is that of the pot that the board decides to allocate to the regional share, that's how it shall be
So
distributed.
there's a chunk that goes
Okay.
to the regions, and a chunk that remains with this board.
Okay.
No, so it's different. It's the regional portion of the foundation share.
Okay, so the board sits here and says, okay, we got $40 million. We're going to allocate 20 million to the 19 regions.
And it shall be done so in accordance.
Okay, so then that I think gets to kind of the next stage of this. So for region 19, that's the one. So region 19 is gonna get 6.2 of the pot, so to speak. So is that actually gonna come to my region? Or are we going to have the capability of applying for grants that total 6% of whatever the pot is that's allocated to the
Correct.
regions, right?
Correct.
Okay, so if we approve grants that say go up to 5%, what happens to the additional 1 or 2%?
So I think that's what we will be writing out in the policy.
Okay,
The process for if, because you have this sort of regional allocation according to that formula. So what happens if you don't get enough, if you get too many, I think that's what we want to give the flexibility to be laid out in the
okay,
policy.
so the grant policy will address those aspects.
Yeah.
With some conversation about.
we have
Well, I guess
multiple
that's part of-
people online that,
Dr. Roizen, I think.
I just, just to put it on the table, the clarification, the amount that's allocated to the, will be set by the grant committee or the board, I should say, by the board committee on an annual basis? Is that the thinking? Because the
Yeah,
money-
that's the 90 days. So within 90 days of receipt of funds, the board has to sort of make a determination as to how you're going to allocate those. So that's where I would foresee you're saying, okay, we have 40 million this year within it's gonna be a little complicated this year because
Right,
you'll have
just
4
ballpark,
payments.
yeah.
So within 90 days of each of those 4 payments, you could lump them together. Within 90 days, you'll make a determination, okay, we want to put 20 million out the door by the regions in 2023. You know, you could do that in accordance with this formulary, but we're a grant-making organization. So that's where it gets back to your fiduciary duty is with the One Ohio Board, not to your region. So you have to, you know, if it's not in the best interest of the foundation to make the allocations, then, and if you can't make a determination without being conflicted, then you shouldn't be involved in that process. And that's why a conflict of interest policy will be really important as well.
Dr. Roizen?
There are two things I think that should be addressed. One is, let's say a region has a grant and let's just say for some reason it's $150,000, but the board says no to that. I think, so we have to have meaning that's the only grant from that region. You have to say, okay, it's not worthy by some standard, and the board would say no if it did say no. And then the money would stay in that region's pot. So I think we need to have something relating to that. And the second thing is there is a grant making ability, and maybe this is where the committee comes in for grants that are non-regional. Meaning, and so I think the board has to have oversight of those as well and the fiduciary responsibility. So I just wanted to make sure that the non-regional funding also has to have a fiduciary responsibility and a review process. I would suggest that maybe we have a intermediate step to advise the board from the expert, either from an expert panel or from a grant-making committee, when that gets the process going, that be involved as well. I think that also addresses some of the worry that it will be cronyism that has been addressed.
We heard the board feedback loud and clear that the board should be the ones to ultimately decide. And so the grant making committee, while it serves a very important purpose, the committee itself should not be the ones approving or denying grants. So the board will have to do that.
Yes. Armand?
Yeah, thank you. My comments are along the lines of what's been made, only I think stronger. Having sat through, not just sat through, but been extremely involved in the tobacco matter where, you know, people went into that and everybody was acting in good faith and there was no intent to move the money out and then it moved out. So a couple suggestions that I would have. One is with the MOU 11F, which it gives the board the power to distribute, to decide how much to distribute and how much to keep. I would, since obviously we can't change the MOU, but in the code of regulations, I would like to see something in there that says, but no event shall the amount to be distributed be less than 20% or some amount that we agree on. So that there's specific amount, because I don't want to see the board retain 100% or 90% in their discretion. And the second point I would make is in 4.03 of the code, proposed code, section 4, the grant committee says it's to prepare, review, and approve applications make recommendations to the board. I would like to see in there, I don't like the idea that the board's gonna make the decisions, period, broad discretion. So I would like to see, I understand the board has to have uh, a role in that, but it's the regional councils that are gonna be, I believe should be, soliciting and choosing among applicants, send those along to the board, and then the board looks at it from a perspective of uh, the language that's in here to conform with the approved purposes under the settlement agreement, but not that they can just pick and choose willy-nilly or in their discretion.
So I think our point as to the fiduciary duties is that they can't, you cannot review simply for the purpose of making sure it conforms with the approved purposes. You have to review it through the lens of your fiduciary duties. So there's more to that. And that's what I think. Marty, do you wanna?
Yeah, I mean, this is, a lot of this is, first of all, gonna go in policy, not code of regulations, because it's gonna be a moving target. And how this process is gonna work and how much is gonna get allocated is gonna change from year to year. You have a duty not only to make sure the funds are being expended for the approved purposes, but it is certainly, hopefully not not common, but it is certainly possible that you will get a request that is duplicative, that is not fully developed, that you look at it and say, there's pieces missing here. The budget makes no sense. How do they plan to get these activities done? I mean, hopefully the regions will do a really good job in every region of vetting the recommendations that come up, and they get to be the guys who reject, at that level. But you may get applications that just aren't fully complete and thought out. And your job is to identify that. That doesn't even necessarily mean that a grant is going to be rejected, but it might be sent back to say, we don't understand this, or you're missing this, or the budget needs to be more fully developed, or we don't think that you can quite do it this way for some legal reasons. That's your fiduciary duty to do that and send it back. If I might, I in a sense liken this to donor advised funds and community foundations. When you give the community foundation your money in a donor advised fund, the community foundation owns legally, they can do whatever the heck they want with it. But if they don't pay attention to the donor's wishes on distributing those funds, they're not going to get any more donor advised funds.
Yeah, but that's where the difference comes, because as a region, we have no ability to hold back future funds. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I think you should give a little more credit to the regional council. If they send along something that's incomplete, that's on them, and I don't believe that's gonna happen, and if it does happen, yeah, I think that under the purposes, you can come back as a foundation and say, we don't know if this complies with the purposes because it's not complete. I mean, I just, to give complete discretion to a foundation, I think undermines the entire purposes of the regional councils.
Well, we're trying to walk a line here, Armin, between what the tax law says and what the MOU says.
But what Armin just suggested, that it fits with the purposes, is the guidepost for that. And the board could reject it if it doesn't fit those guidelines.
Yeah, item 10, for example, right above all this specifies the purpose of supporting evidence-based substance abuse, misuse, and prevention efforts. So there has to be some kind of review that allows, and maybe the burden is on the regions or the applicant, but we have to establish an evidence-based. We heard the term willy-nilly. We need to be giving money out where it's going to be helpful and useful. In item 11, allow that regions might do something together. A couple of regions might come together and put a proposal forward, and it does also allow for statewide. So I think we have to sort this out in that grants committee, but be informed by the MOU. And we're particularly concerned about the evidence base. That's
Correct, on
Go
the
ahead.
boards, I sit on the board, 250 million put back home. And ultimately, the decision sits with the board, but everything gets vetted at the grants committee and so on and so forth before it ever gets there. I've not seen one, because in that committee, they'll send it back and say, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, before they'll take it forward. So I think there's some guidelines we can put in for check marks, if you will.
Absolutely. I think I think we want to make sure that grant making policy is incredibly robust because that's going to be the primary operations of the foundation, right? So
I think we can want that money somehow.
but back to the fiduciary duty. So, there's also, you have to ensure that it comports with the charitable mission of the organization, which the regions, when they're applying, they may not be contemplating that. So, there are additional
All
responsibilities.
that kind of stuff. So there are checks and balances on the back end, but I think, I'm assuming that nobody wants to say, hey, we don't like this one, so we're not going to support it. Why would you?
Holly? Hey, can I just, this is Denise Treehouse. I too am feeling a little defensive for the regional foundations. We've met a few times, we've gone into workshops, we have many, many smart experts at the table. And I would hate to think that this board, the state board will have more discretion over these things than the locals. I don't like that. So I'm wondering if we could add language that says something like the state foundation cannot unreasonably withhold their approval of something that comes from the regional foundation to protect in some way the work of the local foundations related to the request to this board.
So I happen to have language like that here. It reads, the foundation's procedures shall set forth the role of the expert panel and the board in advising, determining, and/or approving disbursements of opioid funds for approved purposes by either the board or the regions. Proposed disbursements to regions of regional shares shall be reviewed only to determine whether the proposed disbursement criteria for approved purposes from the region shall have the responsibility to make the decisions that will allocate funds to projects that will equitably serve the needs of the entire region.
That's the language that gives us concern, that that they're reviewing only for the approved purposes. As we've discussed, they should be a review based on many other factors as it relates to your fiduciary duties. But I do think there's language that we could, add in. I'm just in section 11 and, if the board isn't comfortable with it going through a policy, then I think maybe in section 11, we could add in sort of the procedure or the, it will be at the recommendation of the regions, just that there's additional language to rely upon the regional entities. But I think it's, do you have any thought?
Well, I would just add, I like Jeff's language, and if you're concerned about that doesn't somehow satisfy fiduciary duty, I would appreciate if you could send me something that I could look at to see that.
Okay.
See what the requirements are.
What if rather than trying to figure out which one of these, whether we're going to give the regional the authority to appropriate or whether we're going to give the board the authority to appropriate based on the recommendations of the region, why don't we just put different vote thresholds on these? And then the authority would lie with the board. But for example, if it were a recommendation from these regional groups it's a simple majority vote. If it's something that the board is going to do independently of a regional application or a regional recommendation, then it's maybe a 2/3 vote or something to appropriate that grant money. That way it makes it clear and gives the board the flexibility to say, hey, we're not violating our fiduciary duties. We're taking into account the regional approach. And we're giving the regionals the ability to submit these things and acknowledging the importance of their role. But we're also giving the board the flexibility to act outside of these regional approaches in the event that it's something that is supported by the supermajority, in that case, of board members.
At what point do we, and Holly, you mentioned this earlier, and I forgive me, I'm confused on this point. My expectation was that the money that is coming regarding the region, under the structure, right, not the direct payments, yeah, the regional foundation payments, my understanding was 100% of that was going to go down to the 19 districts in the state. What are we talking about, this extra fund that is not being administered, or rather recommended through the regional foundations? I don't understand what pot of money we're talking about.
Whole thing.
So the board can make a determination as to what percentage of the funds can go towards the regional portion.
So I thought
So there's
initially,
additional,
I believe the same thing, that 100% of those funds are gonna be going to the regions for the purposes.
But you still have to have, there's going to have to be a percentage for operating costs. So you're going to have a percentage of those dollars that are going to pay for the executive director,
and that's
the staff, and all of that. So you have to have, there's no other funds other than the settlement dollars. So a percentage is going to have to go to the operations of the foundation.
And are we not going to put a cap on that in the code of regulations? No. We're gonna just go, every payment, we vote on a different percentage?
I would think at the beginning of each year, whenever you set your budget, that's when you identify what your operating expense will be. Let's say it's 5% of the entire budget, and then the rest goes into grant program, unless you get to a point a few years down the road where you're putting money into a permanent endowment fund of some sort. But I clearly think at the budget setting time period, that's when you know how much your operating account is.
Last question. Do we also, is it the plan to also put aside some percentage where the grants can come directly to this foundation and skip the regions? Is that the plan?
There is provisions for statewide, funding statewide endeavors, yes. As there is a provision for multiple regions putting in a collaborative.
So that percentage will also be decided once a year.
I have no idea what the percentage, but as it's described, it does allow for statewide.
Denise, and maybe if I can comment, is the worry, if the board does its fiduciary responsibility and say there's $116,000 to Region X, and Region X's grant, the board says it doesn't meet its evidence-based purposes, that money should stay in Region X. Does that meet your criteria? I mean, in other words, I don't think the board would want to say it doesn't go to Region X, but it would say Region X has to do a better job or has to come up with a different set of grants to be able to approve that the board didn't think that viable. Does the fact that it would remain in Region X meet what your question is?
Well, no, I was hearing something about a separate pot of money that would somehow be determined, how it's spent by this foundation as opposed to the regional foundations weighing in and providing a recommendation. So the idea that we need operating dollars, with an executive director, that, of course, that's not what I thought I heard. I thought I heard that there might be a fund set aside for a group outside the regions to make recommendations, which is new to me. That's not what I understood was going to happen with these dollars. That I wanted to get clarity on that.
The MOU contemplates that there could be sort of statewide projects, that the foundation could set aside some money for that purpose.
Okay.
It's not a separate pot of money, Denise. It is, would be a portion that the board would decide.
No, I
if
get
they
that.
set aside those dollars.
I get that, but the other side of that is that if we were to do that, and I'm obviously, I feel strongly one way, but the money would come from then the projects that are recommended by the regions, correct? I mean, there's only one pot that's going to, the state's got their pot, the locals have their pot, and we as a foundation have this pot. And if you're going to use some of it for some recommendation coming elsewhere from something other than a region, then the regions are going to get less money. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
So, we have been at this for about 40 minutes now. It's clear that we are not getting to a point where we could take action. There has been some requests for information. So, if it would be the pleasure of the board, I'd like to move on. We do have other actions to take. And that would give Holly time to get information out to the others and to work on the alternative language for the code of regulations.
Before we move on, may I just make a quick comment?
Sure.
One, I just want to say that I'm probably on the other extreme of this conversation. I don't want to be a rubber stamp for grants coming to this board, and I don't want to feel like I'm a rubber stamp. So there has to be, in my mind, a process to say no. Number two, I certainly would like the criteria of each of these regional bodies to follow the same process. Everybody's following the same process that's consistent so that this board can audit what's coming out. So for example, if there are 20 applications and 3 of them are that come to this board, I'd like to see the other 17. Meaning I want to have a full picture of what people are looking at. And I don't know exactly, this is just my gut reaction to what I'm hearing here. That I want to make sure that I have visibility. Inclusion is incredibly important to me. And when the body meets to put the criteria together, and I've said this at other meetings, that I want to make sure that language around inclusion, and inclusion is not just race. Inclusion is very broad, large organizations, small organizations, because my experience has been that the larger organizations are able to navigate this process very differently than the smaller organizations. They have a tougher time, they have smaller staffs, and I want to make sure that they have the ability to access these resources. So I appreciate it being tabled and we come back to it. And I think there's a middle ground here that we'll be able to find, but at least I wanted to articulate I'm probably on the other side of the spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Let me see if I could, one last comment. I mean, I'm sorry I started down this wormhole, but at the end of the day, the objective is for us to protect the money that's designated for the regions, right? In my region 18, we're going to get X percent, and we want to make sure that we protect that percent, and that the processes are set up to allow us to apply appropriately for grants that will, get up to that percentage, whatever the chunk of money is that year. If we don't meet that criteria, that it's not given away to somebody else or it's not gone, that money is still part of our region's ability to make an impact. That's, at the end of the day, that's all I'm looking for.
Could I just ask, Jeff, can you send around the language you had mentioned, or at least send it to me, because I can't write that fast?
Yes, sir. I'd be happy to, Armin. I can, you guys have it, so you can.
We amended to reflect what you just said.
Well, I'll get it out to everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I need to get down to, we're gonna jump again, so I apologize, but we need to go down to the D&O insurance, and at this point, I'm gonna turn it over to Larry.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Actually, rather than talk about D&O, I'm just going to talk about insurance in general.
Okay.
So I worked with 3 different agencies to try to started off as D&O insurance, but then very soon we're going to need to get fraud insurance once we get the money, and then all the other insurances that are involved. And one was the individual that Marty was working with, was at one of our meetings, and then 2 others. All of them had said, we're too small to do anything like this. Partially because of the amount of money, partially because of the distribution of the monies. And the biggest thing, or just as big as the opiate. And the insurance companies apparently do not like to do anything with opiates, even though we're doing grant making and funding, they just don't understand it. So that we had to go to, I did find a company that's a worldwide company, and they're actually have an office in Dublin. I talked to them. We're still in discussions of particularly D&O insurance, director and officer insurance. But then the next conversation will be about fraud. But we haven't finalized anything yet. And given, we do have a lawsuit in place, it's my recommendation that you, as a board, give the executive committee authorization to spend up to $50,000 to start the process of D&O insurance. And then we'll continue to work with that. And hopefully by next meeting, we'll have more information. But we can't wait another month to be able to put this in process.
Mr. Chairman, if that's a motion, second.
We have a first and a second. Any discussion?
I just have one question. Is the only place you could find this in Ireland?
Yeah, Dublin, Ireland. No, Dublin, Columbus, Dublin.
Oh, I didn't know there was one. Okay.
No, he took a trip. He went to Ireland.
Speaker, you should spend more time in Columbus.
Any other discussion? Right. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Dawn, did you second that one?
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay. The next item, we're gonna flip over to the job description for the executive director and the RFP for the search firm for the executive director. And Larry, I'm gonna turn it back over to you again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Much of the information was in the last board packet, and many of you didn't have a chance to access that. So hopefully you've had the chance to read both the job description and the RFP. Today, I'd like to get a motion to approve the job description. If there are any questions specifically about that, Tom developed or helped develop it, and you can direct the questions to Tom. Jeff Simmons, you did have a comment that you sent to Holly. If you'd like to comment on that, you're more welcome to. Specifically about the fundraising piece, and we can have a brief discussion if you'd like.
Thank you. I did send some language, and the idea very simply was, as I recall, at prior meetings, fundraising is one of the strengths of whoever the leader would be, the CEO and so forth. I guess I was raising the question that right now, and I think we've talked about this a little bit today, we're trying to get up and running. And there's still plenty of up and running work to be done by all of us and all of these other people that we will be engaging. And so at least for the time being, just getting up and running is the focus, should be the main focus of that position. But beyond that, the additional discussion today about the regions and the role of the regions, how much the allocation, the monies and all of those things, that's going to take a lot of work. And so while I understand, and I'm not suggesting that the fundraising element should be removed or not considered or not emphasized, I guess it was my thought that maybe that it should be clear that it should not be overemphasized in terms of where the organization is now and likely will be for some time to come. That's all.
Thank you.
Tom,
Can that be addressed in the annual review of the executive director and what the goals and objectives are going to be for next year?
Oh, I would, yes, I would think so.
I would distinguish what we ask for when we hire somebody and then what we as a board direct somebody to do in the first year or second year.
Right.
But when we get to the point that we see this as a really big part of the job, we don't want to look at who we selected and say, oops, they don't bring that skill.
are there any other questions? Dr. Rosen, I see that you.
It'd just be that, I think can we modify the, motion to be that this be the job description subject to modification by the search firm or by our discussion after the search firm, is hired, because they may want to have different, slightly different language.
Yes, we did discuss that in the committee meeting, and that's a good point. Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm looking into the grant making piece, because we were just talking about grant making. Proposals in the administration structure for proposal review, scoring, and award making that incorporates a review panel of substantive experts, including practitioners, scholars, and persons of lived experience.
So I think I'm sorry, are you in the job description?
I am.
Oh, yeah, so that's an expert panel. There's a couple of other things that I think we need to just verbiage that we need to tweak in here, just to make sure it comports with the.
That doesn't, it doesn't speak to the board. Okay.
But we're gonna have expert panel
The board,
groups.
but
That's gonna approve it?
There'll be the expert panels. There will be advisory board, if you will.
So you're gonna have the board and you're gonna have the regionals, and you are suggesting an advisory panel.
That's what the
with
MAU.
board.
That's what.
You're gonna have aggravation with that. Just telling you it's in the job description.
So actually, the expert panel's role is really to determine that it conforms with the approved purposes.
I
So they'll
understand
be
what you're
doing,
saying. I understand when I read it, it's something different. If I were
Yeah,
reading it
we
as a
can
job description.
clean up that part.
There are a couple of pieces in there.
So we can just make sure that this document comports with, first of all, today's conversations, but also the approved portion, the agreed upon portions of the code of regs too.
And I was also a little confused because I thought that we had a whole discussion about not really being a true fundraiser because we have money coming in. Did I miss something?
And I think that was to his point, that not putting that emphasis on that. I mean, at some point, we are going to maybe do that, but right now, just getting structured, that emphasis shouldn't be put on that, but it probably should be in there.
Yeah, I'm just saying, plan and execute strategies to raise funding to support the work. Again, if I were reading this as an applicant, I'd say that's part of my job. That's all I'm reading.
And we did discuss that last meeting and in the committee meetings, that there will be some component, not as somebody had said, selling cookies in front of a fire station, but, fund to fund or foundation to
You may have a
foundation.
corporation that wants to put into
Exactly.
something and
Exactly.
nurturing that. I get it. I'm just looking at that. Do I really have to do major fundraising?
Right.
So I'll make a motion to approve the job description for the executive director.
Second, Greta Mayer.
Not done. Also, the request for proposal for the executive search firm.
Great, thank you.
Greta?
Yes, I'd second that full motion. Sorry, I cut you off, sir.
All right.
We have a first, we have a second. Any discussion? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. And we have like 8 minutes, so
I would focus probably on these.
You don't want to get the,
Whatever. you
yeah.
decide.
Well, can I make a quick motion? We have noticed the level of labor and intensity that the One Ohio has developed, especially as we're trying to put everything together. We talked about securing a board secretary and maybe even a fiscal officer on a very temporary basis through, an employment staffing firm. And we may not have another 30 days to get another approval for this. So I'd like to make a motion to give authorization to the executive committee to find a board secretary and, start the search and maybe even secure a fiscal officer, especially once we get the monies in. Now, this would be a temporary situation and there wouldn't be a long-term contract, so it could be terminated at any time.
Second motion.
First and second.
Do you want to put a dollar limit on that?
If you would like to on your motion. It depends on the positions.
Large ranges.
There's huge ranges. The fiscal officer could be anywhere from 150 an hour and down. The board secretary could be $50 an hour.
Where are they gonna work?
Well, they would have to work remotely right now because we don't have an office. So
That's another item on my list that we have to address. But do you,
would you like to revise the motion with dollar limits?
I would recommend your both dollars.
I heard ranges, I don't think I heard limits.
Well,
yep, 150 and then,
less and
and then 75 or less.
less, yeah.
Okay.
We love Leah, but she's got another job.
Yes, she does.
There's 6 other people she works for.
You're doing a great job.
You are doing a great job, Leah. Any other discussion?
Was it 150 for the?
150, up to 150, and then up to 75. Any further discussion?
Outsource, yeah, that discussion.
I need to take the vote. Yeah.
Oh, for this one, sorry, I jumped ahead, sorry about that.
Okay.
Could we not have some sort of job description in the executive committee for this administrative assistant? That just seems like a considerable amount of money, up to $75.
Or actually, it would be a board secretary, which commands a higher salary than an administrative assistant.
And if we use a company, we've got Markham.
So we're looking, the companies that I've talked to, I don't know, half a dozen or so, and they're providing expertise on that part of it too.
All right. Any other discussion? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Did you need something?
Oh, yeah, I just,
Okay. Is there anything else that we need to vote on before somebody needs to leave?
Do we want to talk about an accounting for securement?
Maybe 2 minutes.
we don't have a code of recs.
We don't.
That-
Yeah, okay.
Howie or Martha, will one of you update us on how we're going to be kept updated on what's happening with the lawsuits?
Sure. As soon as we have confirmation on who's representing you, I can respond to that. But certainly, if Benish is doing the representation, or if we are working with whomever does the representation, we certainly will be updating the board on progress. So, for example, we can let you all know that there's been a status conference and what the result of such a thing is, and when and if it happens. So it'll be a communication. I can't give you a schedule because, the court sets the schedule and litigation kind of sets its own schedule, but we will keep the board updated.
Is there any other actions that we need to address? All right, we're going to get,
Oh,
go.
Okay. You want to clarify the roles?
No, we haven't even talked about this.
I would, update, if we have 2 minutes up
Okay.
ahead, and we can ask Connie to send an email to the board.
Okay,
That would be.
that would be great. Don, do you want to go ahead and give your update?
Well, thank you. I've been asked to take a look at the investment aspects, and as Marty indicated, she's referenced there might be a need for a outside chief investment official until the director is on board and he has the opportunity to hire a permanent or full-time person or firm. So I'll just read from this and we'll eventually distribute it in the share documents. So let me share with you my thoughts on the depository investment aspects of the foundation. It is a step-by-step approach in order to assess how much of the 40 million, and by the way, that's the hypothetical number we're working with for 2022. We'll be investing. We need to understand the foundation, how much the foundation will need for operations and grant awards. I recommend that we hold 2 million aside for operations. That, by the way, that's 5% if the number is 40 million. That would include expenses of the office, salaries, marketing, public relation, benefits and operational expenses for the first full year of operation, with critical functions being performed by staff. Now, the Huntington was selected as the depository for our working account. They can invest that $2 million in money market or other safe short-term instruments linked to the checking account. In our request for depository services, we did state that, and I quote, "The foundation will maintain at least one checking account and one money market account linked to the operating checking account with the ability to transfer funds between the accounts online. The foundation may maintain money market accounts with additional service providers at its discretion. It is anticipated the foundation will employ independent investment managers to advise on the investment of funds, services of which will be sought on a separate request." Close quote. That leaves a balance of $38 million for investments for grant awards in 2023 or beyond. If the board desires to start making grant awards in early 2023, then all the funds which will be used for grant awards should be invested in short-term and stay liquid. Most board members should be aware that there has been an extreme market volatility since March of 2020. Both Huntington and Fifth Third should coordinate with the board officers so they understand the timeframes for the draws for the investments in grants, which will be in a 6 to 8 month timeframe. We all understand the 38 million may sound like a substantial amount of money, but almost all of it will likely be awarded to the 19 regions. Therefore, the use of investment formulas where the funds are invested and the grants are made from earnings will not apply at least through mid-2023, when we expect to see the third draw of funds. However, the board opts to set aside these funds for strictly endowment purposes for the following formula, then the following formula would apply to those funds or other donated funds from outside the settlement. As such, this is the formula. As such, the organization adopts a policy where distribution for endowment spending in a fiscal year will be the minimum of 6% times the previous 12-quarter moving average of market value or the previous distribution increase by the CPI optional plus up to 5% of net contributions to the fund over the last 12 quarters. By the way, those are IRS approved formulas. Both Huntington and Fifth Third can work with the board on both short-term investments and also set up long-term investments once they are needed. Now, I don't recommend the use of an independent advisor until we have fund balances which warrant long-term investments that will not be until sometime in 2023. Otherwise, we're stacking on fees in the short term. But we are meeting with a party on Friday, and I am interested in seeing how we can approach it. You want to balance the extra basis points you're spending towards services versus what you can invest and what benefits you get from having a third party either consult or advise on investments. Because again, both Huntington and Fifth Third, who are depositories, have their own investment arms. And that ends my report.
Thank you. Holly, do you want to go over policies?
So I know that we have individuals that have. to leave.
Yes, so
See whether you
adjourn.
it's up to you.
it's
You
up
want
to
me
the
to-
board if you'd like to adjourn or if you'd like to move through.
I'm happy to.
Or do we need to approve these today? Or are
I
they-
unfortunately have another meeting in 15 minutes.
We're not gonna have a quorum to approve these, but we can still meet and discuss these items. So if there are items that some here have concerns or questions, we can start moving forward towards the next meeting. of Revisions.
So because they're on the agenda and in the interest of time, on the under the section 5D policies, we believe this extensive list of policies in section 1, they should run through the committee process. We received a number of questions through the policy working group, and we just felt like another layer of review was important there. So there's no recommended board action at this time, and you'll be hearing, those of you that are on certain committees will be hearing from us on that. As to the transparency policy, we've had some of those conversations here today. So we will make some revisions to the transparency policy based on the feedback that we received as to the code of regulations, and plan to present that to you at the next board meeting. Feel free, I will circulate these policies again, and feel free to send me specific feedback on them. As to the inclusion policy, I wanted to just ask the board a couple of questions. So that can be as broad or as limited as you would like. I think for an inclusion policy, you could have it as it relates to contracting, as it relates to board membership, as it relates to your employees and your workforce. I think there are just a number of ways that we can draft a policy, and these are not legal recommendations, these are policy decisions of the board. I'm happy to draft it so that it complies with any legal requirements, but I just wanted to get a sense of how broad or limited do you want to make that? You can, for example, you can be as specific as to, it is our goal, put in specific goals and metrics around contracting with minority-owned businesses, for example. You could put in qualifications of the board. You could write that into the code of regulations too. There are a number of different ways to handle it. So this is just an open forum. You can, of course, share your feedback with me in writing as well. But I know that this is a topic of great importance, so we want to make sure that we put a policy before you.
Mr. Budish.
Okay, hi, Armin, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. It's very important. And I think your comments about employees and contracts, I think are all good. I don't know how you put a diversity goal on this board, because the people are selected by, in my experience, is they're selected by the regional councils. So, that's up to them. I don't know, if you say it's, 25% minorities, and the regional councils don't, you say, well, somebody else will do their 20, fill the 25%. I don't know how you do it there. I just, as a practical matter.
I think that's a reasonable point, Mr. Budish.
Well, now my day is made and I can go.
So we can focus at least on these two provisions, and then I would say, in the grant making is another area that I would recommend you consider it as well. Population served by the grant as well.
If you're going to put it in for grant making, then I would defer to the suggestions that Mr. Smitherman had made about, it's not just race, it's all different considerations for inclusion, size of the organizations and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Any other feedback there? Okay.
Are we gonna bring, one quick point, are we gonna bring in any, expert to just address our body about inclusion, like what the options are for us? Or are we just gonna hammer it out as, this team is just gonna hammer it out based on our own experiences?
It would be up to the board to do that. I think that's something we can absolutely discuss. We can put that, up for discussion at the next board meeting as an agenda item.
Actually, I might add we have here the possible approval of an application for an expert panel and committee. So it's application for outside experts. That was not included in your package. I'm doing some additional work on that. But I did in the draft that I had include a section around just generically other experts and some language around the board may from time to time require the expertise of, presentations to the board or others. And so you could build that into a solicitation process so and we could even add specifically diversity and inclusion into that if that's of interest. Okay, I'll add that in.
Thank you. All right, well, seems to be, people are packing up, many have left. So at this point, I want to thank everyone for coming today and taking time out of your schedules to participate. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I move. Second. So Armin, before we go, for years I've been telling you that you're always the best dressed guy in the room, and I just wanted to let you know, you might not be able to see it, but Mayor Don Mason is throwing down the gauntlet. Gotta keep.
Oh, no, I didn't see that.
Well, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Meeting with the bishop earlier today.
Yeah, he's interested.